The first thing I heard was knocking, from inside the walls. Not outside the cabin. Not on the door. Inside the walls. 3 slow knocks, directly behind my bed. I froze so hard I could actually hear my teeth click together. I was 23 when this happened. I had rented an old firewatch cabin deep in the mountains of northern Montana for 4 nights. I wanted to get away from people, my phone, everything. The place was completely isolated. No nearby roads. No neighbors. Just endless pine trees and cliffs covered in fog. The owner told me the nearest town was almost an hour away. At first it felt peaceful. The cabin sat on a hill surrounded by thick woods. During the day, I hiked trails and cooked canned food over the small stove. But at night, things felt wrong. The silence out there was heavy. Not normal silence. The kind where every tiny sound makes your stomach tighten. The second night was when it started. I woke up around 2 a.m. to the sound of footsteps outside. Slow crunching in the gravel. I stayed still in bed listening. Crunch. 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 Someone was walking circles around the cabin. At first I thought it was an animal. Maybe a deer. But the footsteps stopped directly outside my window. Then nothing. No movement. No sound. I slowly reached for my flashlight and pointed it toward the curtains. That's when I noticed something that made my chest go cold. The shadow outside the curtain was too tall. And perfectly still. I couldn't see details. Just the outline of a person standing inches from the glass. Watching me. I grabbed my phone to call someone, but there was no signal. The cabin Wi-Fi had died earlier that evening during the storm. The shadow didn't move for almost a minute. Then it slowly walked away. I heard the gravel crunch again, moving toward the back of the cabin. I didn't sleep after that. The next morning I went outside to check. There were footprints everywhere around the cabin. Boot prints. Deep ones. Whoever it was had walked around the cabin for a long time. I should have left then. I know that now. But the road down the mountain had partially flooded from the storm, and my small car barely made it up there in the first place. I convinced myself it was probably some hunter or drunk hiker messing around. That night, I locked every door and window before sunset. I even pushed the kitchen table against the front door. Around midnight, I started hearing movement again. This time it wasn't outside. It was under the cabin. The place was built on old wooden supports above a slope. There was a crawl space underneath it. I heard scraping first. Then slow movement. Like someone crawling beneath the floorboards. I muted the TV and listened carefully. A low dragging sound moved from one side of the cabin to the other. Directly under me. I grabbed the fireplace poker and stood there in silence. Then came the knocking. 3 knocks. Directly beneath my feet. I backed away instantly. A few seconds later I heard breathing. Not loud. But close. Close enough that it sounded like it was coming through the floorboards themselves. I couldn't move. I just stood there holding the poker while sweat rolled down my neck. Then, silence again. Minutes passed. Nothing. Finally, I forced myself to look outside through the kitchen window. At first I saw nothing except darkness and trees moving in the wind. Then my flashlight beam landed on something near the edge of the woods. A small camping chair. Facing the cabin. Someone had placed it there. And sitting beside it was a cooler. Like they'd been watching me for hours. My stomach dropped. That's when I noticed another thing. The chair wasn't empty. Someone was sitting in it. Completely still. I couldn't see their face. Just dark clothing and the outline of their body. Watching the cabin. Watching me. Then the person slowly stood up. And started walking toward the house. I ran to the bedroom and locked the door even though I knew it wouldn't help. The cabin was old. Thin walls. Weak locks. The footsteps reached the porch. Then silence. A minute later, the doorknob started turning. Slowly. Back and forth. Testing the lock. I held my breath. The turning stopped. Then came a soft laugh. Right outside the door. Not crazy laughter. Not movie villain stuff. Just quiet, amused laughter. Like whoever was out there knew I was terrified. Then I heard something slide under the front door. A photograph. I waited until the footsteps disappeared before I forced myself to go look at it. It was an old printed photo. Blurry. Dark. But it was clearly the cabin. Taken from the woods. And standing in the cabin window was me. The clothes in the photo were the same clothes I was wearing that night. Which meant the picture had been taken recently. Very recently. My hand started shaking so badly I dropped it. Then I noticed writing on the back. Check the basement. The cabin wasn't supposed to have a basement. But then I remembered the locked trapdoor in the kitchen floor. I'd noticed it earlier and assumed it led to plumbing or storage. The scraping sound underneath the cabin suddenly made sense. I didn't want to open it. Every instinct told me not to. But I needed to know if someone was under there. I grabbed the flashlight and kitchen knife and pulled the table away from the trapdoor. The metal latch was already unlocked. That's what scared me most. I opened it slowly. Cold air rushed out. There was a ladder leading down into darkness. The smell hit me immediately. Rotten food, sweat, damp earth. I pointed the flashlight down. At first I saw blankets. Food wrappers. Water bottles. Then I saw the wall. Covered in photographs. Hundreds of them. Pictures of me hiking. Cooking. Sleeping. Changing clothes near the window. Some were from outside the cabin. Some were from inside. And then my flashlight landed on the far corner. Someone was sitting there. A man. Skinny. Filthy. Barefoot. He was staring directly at me. Smiling. I screamed and slammed the trapdoor shut, but before I could lock it, he lunged upward and smashed his shoulder against it from below. The entire floor shook. I threw my weight onto the door while he pounded underneath me like an animal. Then I heard his voice. Calm. Almost gentle. You weren't supposed to find me yet. I ran. I grabbed my keys and bolted through the front door into the storm. Behind me I heard the trapdoor burst open. Then fast footsteps inside the cabin. I made it to my car and drove down the mountain half-blind through the rain. At one point I looked in the mirror. And saw headlights behind me. Someone was following me down the mountain road. I hit speeds I shouldn't have. My car almost slid off the edge twice. Eventually I reached the highway and found a gas station with people inside. The headlights disappeared before they reached the station. Police went back to the cabin the next morning. The crawlspace was empty. No man. No blankets. No photos. Nothing. Except for one thing. Taped to the wall above my bed, right where the knocking came from, was a new photograph of me sleeping. Taken from inside the room. I woke up because someone was breathing outside my bedroom window. At first I thought I was still dreaming. The sound was slow, wet, close enough that it fogged the glass. Then I heard my dog whine under the bed and refused to come out. That's when I realized the breathing had been there for a while. I was 19 at the time, staying alone in my uncle's cabin deep in the mountains of northern Montana. He used the place during hunting season, but in early October it sat empty most of the year. No neighbors. No cell service. Just miles of trees and one dirt road leading in and out. I actually liked the isolation at first. It felt peaceful. The cabin was small. One bedroom, a kitchen and a living room with an old wood stove. The windows didn't even have curtains, just darkness pressing against the glass at night. My uncle had left 2 days earlier after showing me how to run the generator and lock the storage shed because according to him, people wander through these woods sometimes. I laughed when he said it. I didn't laugh later. The first night alone was normal. Quiet. Cold. I watched movies on my laptop until the generator sputtered out around midnight. The second night was different. Around 11 p.m., my dog Ranger suddenly stood up from the rug and stared at the front door. completely still. Not barking. Just staring. I remember saying, "What is it?" Then I heard it. Crunch. Crunch. Slow footsteps outside. Not animal sounds. Human footsteps. I muted the TV and listened carefully. The steps circled the cabin once. Then they stopped near the side window. I waited for a knock. Nothing came. After maybe 5 minutes, the footsteps moved away into the woods again. I barely slept that night. The next morning, I checked outside expecting to see deer tracks or something that would calm me down. Instead, I found boot prints in the mud beside the cabin. Large prints. Fresh. Whoever it was had stood directly outside my bedroom window. I should have left then. Honestly, I know that now. But the nearest town was over an hour away, and I convinced myself it was probably some hunter passing through. That night I locked every window and pushed a chair under the front doorknob. Around 1 a.m., the generator died again. The cabin went black instantly. No lights outside. No moon. Nothing. Just darkness. Then, crunch. Crunch. The footsteps came back. Closer this time. Ranger began growling low in his throat. The kind of growl dogs make when they're genuinely afraid. I grabbed my uncle's hunting rifle from beside the couch and stood there listening. The footsteps stopped on the porch. One step creaked directly outside the front door. Then another. I could actually hear the wood bending under the person's weight. A hand touched the doorknob. Very slowly. The knob turned once to the left. Stopped. Then again harder. My chest felt tight. I remember holding my breath so he wouldn't know exactly where I was standing. After about 10 seconds, the knob stopped moving. Silence. Then I heard something worse. A quiet laugh. Not loud. Not crazy sounding. Just a soft little chuckle from the other side of the door. Like whoever it was already knew I was terrified. Ranger suddenly barked and lunged toward the door, and right after that, footsteps sprinted off the porch into the woods. I stayed awake until sunrise holding the rifle. The next day I packed my stuff and planned to leave before dark. But when I tried starting my truck, it wouldn't turn over. Nothing. I opened the hood thinking the battery died. The wires had been cut. Cleanly. I remember my stomach dropping so hard it actually hurt. Someone didn't want me leaving. That realization changed everything. Suddenly the cabin didn't feel isolated anymore. It felt trapped. I spent the next few hours trying to stay calm while figuring out what to do. I found an old radio in the storage shed, but it barely worked. Mostly static. By evening, snow started falling lightly through the trees. Then the sun disappeared. And the woods went black again. I pushed the kitchen table against the front door this time. Covered the windows with blankets. Loaded the rifle with shaking hands. Around midnight, Ranger started barking at the back of the cabin. I heard footsteps again. But now there were 2 sets. One near the back door. One circling the side of the cabin. I froze. Because I realized something horrifying. There wasn't just one person out there. Someone knocked 3 times on the back door. Slow. Heavy. Then another voice whispered near the side window. "Come outside." I nearly threw up when I heard it. The voice sounded calm. Almost friendly. That made it worse. Ranger barked violently and scratched at the floor while the people outside kept moving around the cabin. I heard them testing windows. Scratching lightly against the walls. Laughing quietly to each other. Like they were enjoying it. Then came the sound I'll never forget. Metal scraping against metal. They were trying to open the storage shed. A few minutes later, I saw flashlight beams moving through the cracks in the blankets covering the windows. One of them was right outside. Then the bedroom window shattered. Glass exploded inward. Ranger charged instantly toward the room, snarling like I'd never heard before. A man climbed halfway through the broken window wearing a dark winter jacket and gloves. I fired the rifle without thinking. The blast inside the cabin deafened me. The man screamed and fell backward outside into the snow. Everything went silent for maybe 2 seconds. Then the second man started running around the cabin fast, furious footsteps slamming against the porch. He began screaming obscenities and kicking the front door repeatedly. The wood cracked. Again. Again. I dragged a bookshelf against the entrance while Ranger barked non-stop. Then suddenly, the kicking stopped. Silence again. That silence was somehow worse than the noise. I thought maybe he ran away. Then I heard movement above me. On the roof. Slow footsteps crossing the cabin ceiling. I looked up just as dust drifted down from the attic hatch in the hallway. The hatch handle moved slightly. Tiny movement. Then more. Someone had been on the roof long enough to reach the attic entrance. I backed away slowly with the rifle aimed upward. The hatch opened about 3 inches. I saw fingers curl around the edge. Dirty fingers. Human fingers. Ranger lunged first. The man dropped halfway through the opening holding a knife, but Ranger hit him in the chest midair. Both of them slammed into the hallway floor. I fired again. The sound echoed through the cabin. Then everything stopped. Completely stopped. The only sound left was Ranger crying softly beside me. When police finally arrived the next afternoon, after I managed to get the radio working, they found 2 men. One dead in the snow outside the bedroom window. The other bleeding in the hallway. Both were escaped prisoners from 2 counties over. What disturbed the police most wasn't the attack itself. It was what they found inside the dead man's backpack. Photos. Dozens of them. Pictures of me inside the cabin. Sleeping. Cooking. Watching TV. Even one photo taken through my bedroom window the first night I arrived. Which meant they had been watching me long before I ever heard those footsteps outside. The first sign that something was wrong was the smell. Not smoke. Not rot. Wet earth, and something metallic. Like fresh blood. I noticed it the second I unlocked the cabin door, and by midnight, I realized I wasn't alone in those mountains. I rented the place for 3 nights to get away from everything. No signal. No neighbors. Just a small hunting cabin deep in the woods near the northern mountains. The owner gave me a key at a gas station about 40 miles away, and told me the nearest town was an hour drive if the roads stayed clear. At first it felt peaceful. The cabin sat in a clearing surrounded by tall pine trees that blocked most of the sky. There was an old fire pit outside and a broken wooden fence half swallowed by weeds. Inside, the place was tiny. 1 bedroom. 1 bathroom. A living room with a wood stove. The silence out there felt heavy. Not relaxing. Heavy. By evening, rain started falling. Soft at first. Then harder. Wind pushed against the walls, making the old cabin creak every few minutes. I made coffee and sat near the window with a flashlight beside me. Around 10 p.m., I noticed something strange. The muddy ground outside the cabin had footprints in it. Fresh ones. I remember freezing when I saw them. Boot prints. They came out of the woods and stopped right beneath the living room window. I told myself they were old. Maybe from the owner. Maybe from hunters. But they weren't filled with rainwater. They looked fresh. I checked the front door lock twice after that. Around midnight, I woke up suddenly. No idea why. The room was completely dark except for faint moonlight leaking through the curtains. The rain had stopped. That's when I heard it. Crunch. Crunch. Slow footsteps outside. I stayed perfectly still in bed listening. The footsteps circled the cabin slowly. Gravel crunching under heavy boots. Then silence. Then 3 knocks. Tap. 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 Not loud. Almost polite. I didn't move. I stared at the bedroom door for what felt like forever. My chest hurt from holding my breath. Then I heard breathing. Right outside the bedroom window. Slow. Deep. Someone was standing there. I grabbed the flashlight from the nightstand and pointed it toward the curtain, but I couldn't force myself to pull it open. The breathing stopped. Then footsteps moved away from the cabin again. I didn't sleep after that. At sunrise, I went outside with a kitchen knife in my hand like an idiot. The forest looked normal. Quiet. But the footprints were closer now. They circled the entire cabin. Every window. Every door. Whoever it was had walked around the place for hours. I packed my stuff immediately. I wanted to leave right then, but my car wouldn't start. The engine clicked once and died. I tried again and again. Nothing. That metallic smell hit me again when I stepped out of the car. Stronger this time. I followed it around the side of the cabin and found the problem. My tires had been slashed. All four. I remember my stomach dropping so hard I thought I was going to throw up. Someone had trapped me there. I ran back inside and locked every door. The only shotgun in the cabin was mounted above the fireplace, but when I grabbed it, I realized it was ancient. Rusted shut. No signal on my phone either. I spent the next few hours peeking through curtains like a paranoid maniac. Every shadow between the trees looked human. Around afternoon, I finally saw movement. Far back in the woods. A man. He stood perfectly still between two trees. Too far away to see clearly, but I could tell he was watching the cabin. I shouted at him. No response. He just stood there. Then slowly stepped behind a tree and disappeared. That night was worse. Much worse. The footsteps came back after dark. This time there were no attempts to hide them. Heavy boots stomping around outside. Then scratching. Something dragged slowly across the cabin walls. I heard quiet laughing at one point. Low and breathy. I stayed crouched beside the couch holding a fireplace poker, staring at the windows. At around 2 a.m., the generator outside suddenly shut off. The cabin went black instantly. No lights. No sound except wind outside. Then came the knock. Bang! 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 The entire front door shook. I jumped back so hard I hit the wall. Another bang followed. Harder this time. Then silence. I could hear my own heartbeat. And then... a voice. Open the door. A man's voice. Calm. Almost friendly. I know you're in there. I didn't answer. He started walking around the cabin again. Slowly. I heard him stop outside the kitchen window. Then came a horrible sound. A long, wet dragging noise. I shined my flashlight toward the window and nearly screamed. There was a deer head sitting on the windowsill outside. Freshly cut. Blood running down the glass. That metallic smell filled the room instantly. The man started laughing again. Not loud. Just quiet little chuckles in the dark. Then I heard another voice outside. A second person. Whispering. That's when I realized there wasn't just one man out there. There were two. Maybe more. The back door handle suddenly started turning. Slowly. Carefully. I ran into the bedroom and shoved the dresser against the door while they started banging on the cabin from different sides. Windows rattled. Wood cracked. One of them shouted, "We know you don't have a car." I remember shaking so badly I could barely breathe. Then everything stopped. No banging. No voices. Nothing. For maybe 10 minutes the woods were completely silent. Too silent. Then I heard footsteps inside the cabin. The front door had opened. I heard them walking slowly through the living room. One of them laughed softly. Another said, "Check the bedroom." I climbed out the bedroom window before they reached the door. I hit the ground hard and ran straight into the forest without looking back. Branches cut my face. Mud soaked my shoes. I could hear them crashing through the woods behind me, yelling to each other. Flashlights moved between the trees. They were hunting me. I kept running downhill until I saw an old ranger station near the road. Empty. Abandoned. I locked myself inside and hid under a desk while their lights moved through the trees outside for almost an hour. At some point one of them stopped right outside the building. I could hear him breathing through the broken window. Then he whispered something I'll never forget. "You should have stayed in the cabin." The footsteps finally faded before sunrise. Police found me the next morning half-conscious and covered in mud. They searched the cabin later that day. The place was destroyed. Doors broken open. Furniture overturned. And in the bedroom, they found photographs. Dozens of them. Pictures of me unloading my car. Pictures through the cabin windows during the night. Even pictures of me sleeping in bed. The oldest photo was dated 2 days before I even arrived there.